Okay.
All right, welcome everybody. Thanks for coming out. Last session of the day. Everyone's still mostly awake. My name is Michael Cooper. I've got Loay with me.
Hey guys.
We're going to be talking through Citrix on Azure and Microsoft in general. Two things I want to point out to you guys because you can laugh at them as they happen. Loay and I have been doing this session and this content for about 6 years now, both as Microsoft employees and then as Citrix employees and then as Microsoft employees and then as Citrix employees. The only thing we've never done is a 100 level version of this session. So we will be kicking each other from time to time if we get too much into the weeds because that's where we do like to stay. So the session's listed as 100. We're going to do our best to stay there. Or close, but there is some technical space in here where it's hard not to be a little down below. Second thing to watch for, just because Loay is Loay and that's what he does, he's doing all of his demos live and he is connected into Azure right now to do those demos. And so pray to the demo gods that it all works out, but that's just what Loay does. And so what I do want to talk through is we're going to talk through the Microsoft Citrix partnership. What is Azure? Why Citrix plus Azure? Understanding the key Citrix solutions on Azure. Then we're going to take a little bit of a deep dive into Microsoft and Citrix tools, specifically around CVAD, so that's Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktops running on Azure. And again, we're going to try and stay high. At times, we're going to go low. It's not our fault, but we'll again try and stay around the 100 level, which is what the system was tagged as. And so we do want to call out the overall partnership that is Citrix and Microsoft. We are 100% confident in this statement that we do think it's the most powerful partnership in the industry. And I can show you a couple of reasons why, and why it then matters to Azure in general. It's a 25-plus year partnership. We share a joint customer base in which we've been working together for in about 90% of the Fortune 100. It's 400,000 joint customers and tens of millions of users. The core business it's always been in terms of the Zen app, which is the RDS, the terminal services stuff, that business is still actually growing. It had its record year this year within Microsoft. It's now over $1 billion business just to Microsoft, just the core business, which is the terminal services stuff that you've always known Microsoft and Citrix for. But there's a lot more that we do. Overall, we have commitments within each other and engineering agreements within each other for day one support of most Microsoft major releases. You saw us that with Server 19 as it's shipping. You're going to see that with WVD. As Microsoft ships, Citrix will ship at the same time, and that's due to a very tight partnership between us. The other thing that is important to note and kind of fun to think about Citrix in a different way, Citrix is based most of its cloud solutions on Azure. It's an easy statement to say, but let me explain to you what that means. Citrix is one of the 10 largest consumers of Azure on planet Earth. We're one of the biggest users of Azure. Where you talk about any of the advanced Microsoft and Azure services, Cosmos DB, machine learning, yep, that's us. So we have one of the largest Cosmos DB installs on the planet. If you went to Build, Microsoft's primary conference about developing cloud solutions, they highlight Citrix as an example of how to do cloud services and how to build cloud services on services like machine learning and Cosmos DB. So everything that we're talking about isn't just trusting your solutions on it, we're trusting our solutions on it too. That extends to other partnerships within Microsoft in terms of SD-WAN, ADC, and WVD, which I'm going to get into here in just a second. So the partnership, in our opinion, has never been stronger and has never been deeper. One thing I do need to point out, there are 3 clouds at Microsoft. 3, not 1. So a lot of people think Azure and Microsoft Cloud are the same thing. They're not. Azure is one of Microsoft's cloud. They also have M365, which is their modern workplace cloud. That's Office, that's Outlook, that's Azure AD, that's Intune. I'm going to touch upon that, but this is an Azure session, so we're going to go deep on the Azure side, not the modern workplace side. But Citrix has integrations and ties to all of it. And modern workplace, Azure, anyone catching on that I only named 2 of the cloud? What's the 3rd cloud at Microsoft? Dynamics. Don't forget, Microsoft people forget it too. So those are the, oh, sorry. I'm getting glares from the Microsoft people in the room. Those are the 3 clouds we're partners with all. So let's break into what that looks like. And so there's the overall solutions and conversations, Azure and modern desktop, Microsoft 365. And then if you look at it in terms of the build-outs, the sessions you've been seeing, the content you've been having, the conversations you've been having with Citrix, we align to almost every single thing that Microsoft's doing as it's in its journey to cloud. And it's a really fun time to be in this partnership because everything is changing really fast. And so if we dive into the specifics, which is, hey, the Azure side of it. So let's not talk about, we're not doing Intune or AD and the rest, we're just going to talk about Azure. So what is Azure and why Citrix plus Azure? Microsoft slide, what is Azure? 54 regions, according to Microsoft, and the data is true. That's more regions than the other two clouds that you know put together. The Citrix Cloud Service is in every one of those regions. And so we use the power and breadth of Azure to ensure that our service and solution is wherever you need it to be. But that also means that you can use our service that is Azure-based to manage desktops or solutions within Google or AWS or on-premise. But we ensure then that our services is there. Its infrastructure is massive. Here's my favorite picture of Azure, though, because everyone wants to say, what does Azure look like? That's US West 2, which is a major Azure data center. There's somewhere around 350,000 servers in that complex. Hey, that's impressive. That's big buildings with lots of servers in them. That's not the thing I like to point out. 300, 400,000 servers in there, count the parking spaces. Admins per server in the cloud world, in terms of scale and scope and what they're able to do and accomplish, is just staggering. And they're not even all full. The automation and capability is what they bring is pretty impressive. So instead of me telling you why Citrix and Azure, we do have a couple of great customer quotes. Why Citrix plus Azure? They're saying it just makes sense, and their customers understand it. It's a global scale and scope, and it makes sense to them. Most of them are already using some Azure or services, and so the tie there matters. Same thing with CoreTech. Where they're selling services to a company, it's easy for them to say, hey, do I trust your cloud solution? Well, my cloud solution is Azure. Okay, well then yes, Citrix plus Azure, that makes sense. It's an easy way to then build out services that are kind of instantly trusted and understood from your organization. So let's talk through at a very high level, because there's a lot of content and not a lot of time, on what the core Citrix on Azure solutions are. And if you break them down between networking, analytics, and workspace, in the networking side, there is a lot that we do with Azure today, and it's one of the most overlooked areas of the Microsoft Citrix and Azure partnership. And primarily, it's ADC, and that's SD-WAN, which we'll talk about it here in a second, and the SD-WAN integration with Office 365, as well as DNS private zones, which is a public preview and coming out here shortly. The best part of our networking solutions is if you're a NetScaler customer today, and as you start moving your applications into a cloud, be that Azure or AWS or Google, you get to use that ADC technology and to easily bridge your applications from on-premise into cloud, and you can do that in a hybrid way. And Loay is going to show you that within the terms of the desktop and app service, but that's true for just all of your regular applications as well. And so what the ADC allows you to do, and being it's just part of the Azure Marketplace, you just go into the Marketplace, click on the image, deploy it, and now, hey, look, you're connecting your Azure infrastructure with your Citrix on-premise infrastructure versus the NetScaler interface you already understand. And the ADC then allows that from a load balancing perspective, from an SSL and security and everything else perspective as well. Then the other side to that is SD-WAN, or software-defined wide area networking. SD-WAN is a really compelling conversation that we're having with most of our customers now in the networking space, both in the Azure. So if you have an application running in Azure and you want to use SD-WAN to intelligently send traffic to it, it makes sense. But it really makes a difference when you're also talking about Office 365. When I go back to the statement of Microsoft has 3 clouds, a lot of people assume that all Office is Azure and Azure is Office. They're not, actually. There are data centers out there that are Azure only, and there are data centers out there that are Office only. And the intelligence of SD-WAN and what we're doing is we can drop an SD-WAN appliance in your organization into a remote office and intelligently route traffic. So if this is just regular internet traffic, let's not take up your expensive pipe. Let's send that to the internet. If this is Teams-based traffic, okay, great. Let's send that automatically to the correct Office 365 point so that their voice and video is far better than anything you can do without that intelligent. And then if it's part of your SAP or Epic or whatever other solution you're using, you can then embed that on your standard WAN pipes. And so intelligently separating that content and sending it to the right source, even if you don't know where that current source is. We do, and we do that because of the partnership we have with Microsoft. We were their day one launch partner for SD-WAN and O365, and it ties in very well with our overall NetScaler ADC conversation. And if you're already a NetScaler and you're already an Intune customer and you're already looking at O365, that partnership is most likely things you already own and most likely things that we can just turn on in your organization now. And when you do, the improvements and capabilities of just the voice and video and even contextual text or typing, so Office running in a desktop, not virtualized in any way, not in a way you'd think when you're thinking Citrix, is still dramatically accelerated because of the magic we're doing behind the scenes in partnership with Microsoft because of SD-WAN. And then tying into the third piece of the puzzle, and also the easiest piece of the Azure Citrix puzzle to use, is analytics. Microsoft's making huge investments in what it's calling Graph. And Graph in the Microsoft world is Azure AD and all of its core analytics capabilities. And the good news is as you're using Citrix Cloud, we automatically integrate with Graph. And so we can send you intelligent network traffic. We can send you intelligent security traffic around it. And then we're working with Microsoft to also share and talk through in terms of user experience and Office experience, where we're both be able to share that core bit of information. And you, as a user of Citrix, don't actually have to care where that's coming from because we're integrating with Graph behind the scenes to tie the two systems together. So analytics is a huge chunk of what we're doing in partnership with the Azure guys, but it's something that you don't have to worry about because it's just automatically there. But with that said, most of you are here probably to think about the traditional Citrix virtual apps and desktops running on Azure. And so I'm going to turn it over to the guy who probably knows more about it than anyone else.
All right.
Loy.
Thank you. So I'm putting this slide over, and probably many of you have seen it before, possibly. And it's not about talking about each one of them. It's more about saying, we give you options. So through Citrix Cloud, you can have the control plane hosted by us, or you can lift and shift that control plane to Azure, or you could potentially have it on premises today, but you can use Azure as a target as well. And those options are all available to you. Or under the same construct, you can even connect to other clouds. So that's pretty much what this slide is focusing on. It's the options that we give you. What we're suggesting is using Citrix Cloud Service, and what I like is Azure. So that's what I'm going to be focusing on today. Before I push through, I want a quick show of hand. Who has seen or logged on to the Azure portal? Just gives me a little bit of feel. OK. Same hands. Who feels they're very comfortable with Azure? OK, way less. About maybe 20%. OK.
You guys are getting me in trouble because I made him practice his level 100, and
it's
now he's not going to go level 100.
It's OK. I can handle whatever level. But
yeah, you see him smirking. He's happy
I'm being
now.
boxed here. I don't want that. Citrix Cloud. Comfortable with Citrix Cloud. OK, perfect. What I'm going to be doing now is I'm going to go through a quick deployment, and I'm going to talk about some architectural considerations. And we'll see how deep we go, depending on time. To have a successful virtual apps and desktops, you got to do good planning, you got to set your governance, and you're going to do your deployment. For architects, there's way more boxes, but for 30 minutes, that's as much as we can fit. So let me start with a little demo here. For those who have not seen the clouds before. All right, let me do this. Probably that'll make it more comfortable for folks. All right, so this is the Azure portal. There is about at least 300 services in Azure, or about 300 services. The ones we're going to focus on are the compute and networking. And in those, there are virtual machines, there is storage, there is availability sets, and so forth. Networking, there's VNets, network interfaces, and so forth. When you go to Azure, there's two main constructs. There is Azure Active Directory, and there's subscriptions. Probably a lot of you know both. Azure Active Directory is an identity provider that you get if you've got O365, or if you've ever created an Azure subscription, you get that by default. If you've got an O365 email, you get that by default as well. And then within a subscription is where you can deploy resources. Within a subscription, there are resource groups. Resource group is simply an envelope, a grouping of different items that you can manage together. The key in here is, or the key suggestion in here is, make sure that different components of your system are deployed in different resource groups for two main reasons. So let me explain. Your core infrastructure, I'd advise to have it in a single group or depending more than one group. Your Citrix, let me show some of the parts here and here. This was a demo, or that was a lab that we used. So in here, if I can put 104, oops. I'd created three groups. One is the infra, one is for the server targets, and one for Windows client targets. In real life, you're going to create one for Citrix infrastructure, for the core infrastructure, for your data plane, where your profiles and other data points are, and one for your target VMs or target apps. Okay? That's a key thing there. So I'm going to stop here at Azure again. And I'm going to go quickly to Citrix Cloud. So for those who haven't seen Citrix Cloud has a lot of services. Most of you probably have not used all these services in there. What we're going to focus on is the virtual apps and desktops today. But we have a lot of other integration points with Microsoft when we talk endpoint management. We have a lot of integrations with Intune and so forth. For the purposes of the discussion, that's the service we care about, virtual apps and desktops. Few constructs I'd like to explain in Citrix Cloud. There's a construct called resource location. And resource location is, as it sounds, a target location where you can install your apps and desktops. It could be on-prem. I've got multiple resource locations in here. It could be for my demo lab. It could be GCP, it could be AWS. From that single pane of glass, you can do all these different connections. The other thing is the identity, of course, which is important for any discussion. And if I look at identity, to log on to Citrix Cloud, usually you use your email as an identity. However, you can connect, we also extend, and you can add or import your AAD identity. That way, that same user that you log on to Azure, that you log on to your email, you can also log on to Citrix Cloud to as an admin, as an end user as well. But in this case, I'm talking as an admin. So those are the few things I want to quickly show before going back to the slide. All right. So we talked, you need to plan. There are certain considerations. This is a lovely eye chart. You don't have to read that. You're welcome to take a photo of it. But there are a few things you need to consider when planning your virtual apps and desktop deployment in Azure. Will the Azure subscription contain only Citrix resources? We do recommend that, but we understand that might not always be an option. If it's, quote unquote, a Citrix-only subscription, I would always suggest give us full rights to it and we'll manage. If it is not, I suggest otherwise. I suggest you don't give our Citrix identity full access to the subscription. Give us the access that we need to manage virtual apps and desktops. Should you use single or multiple subscription? That depends on your scale. As of now, a simple number I say, if you're doing more than 1,000 VMs, split them across. Coming very soon, we're going to be increasing that capacity. Azure limits are 25,000 desktops per subscription. We tell you 1,000 for different reasons because they have API limits, and that we might hit. So keep that in mind. There is a very, very important website that I'd like everyone to know who's architecting this, and that would be the Azure limits. Here you go. This is updated like on a weekly basis. Actually, if I'm looking here, it was updated 2 days ago. And this tells you how many of anything you can do. How many can you put in a group? How many VMs can you put in a resource? How many IOPS do you get on a single disk? And all these are key for your success. So I have a link in the deck to this very, very long page.
And if you're ever wondering how many is too many subscriptions, Citrix has thousands. Don't do what Citrix did. But it's very, very common to have multiple. It's very common to have multiple, especially on a large project. If you have a large Epic project and Citrix is going to be a small portion of it, then it might make sense for that Citrix environment to live within the Epic. But if you're doing a large desktop as a service solution or your Citrix is the primary thing, then Citrix should be its primary subscription, possibly even more than one subscription.
And on that note, you can have hundreds of subscriptions under the same AAD tenant. So there's no worries there about identity. All right. I think that's enough about subscriptions. The second thing you need to consider is what Azure regions you're going to be using. That depends on multiple factors: compliance, data residency, depending where you are in the world. If you need to be in Azure Gov, we support that, and we support public Azure. Or a specific region. Service availability. Sometimes you want a specific type of VM. Let's talk about, like there's the N-series VM in Azure, which supports GPU. You might need that. That doesn't exist in every Azure region. So that's a decision point you need to make.
We do not support secret or top secret. If you know of Azure, I don't know if we're allowed to talk about the Azure secret or top secret. Is that the first rule? Can't talk about it. But you can take our long-term service software and run it in secret and top secret just fine. We have customers doing Citrix in the secure data centers. They just don't use our cloud service to do it. They use our traditional software.
All right. Of course, other things are proximity and so forth. But again, you can use things like SD-WAN and ADCs to optimize that traffic. All right, so that's the early part of the planning. I didn't talk about VM types yet. I'll talk about that later on. Let's talk a little bit about governance. So once you set your subscriptions, you want to know who gets what. That's a very key thing in the security world. So we talked about resource group. This shows a little bit of, OK, I'm going to break resource groups to different functional aspects: desktops, apps, Citrix infrastructure, core infrastructure. The key thing about resource groups in this case is that they can be an administrative envelope. You can set role-based access control. So that means one admin can have access to the core infrastructure, while another admin can only have access to the apps and desktops. The reality is Azure can have role-based access control down to the resource, but that gets really complex. You'd rather do it at a group level. You can also set things like clocks and so forth where customers don't, or users don't mistakenly delete, or admins don't mistakenly delete resources. And that's set also at a group level.
The other reason that you break them apart like this, so we don't talk about as much as we should, is for billing. So tracking and understanding the cost of your solution tied to, if you've got them bundled correctly, it's far easier to understand the costs, and more importantly, notice when something goes out of whack. If you're suddenly seeing in your core infrastructure a bill $5,000 more in 1 month than the other, that should not happen. right? And so if you've got them broken up, it's easier to notice price differentiations and differences.
Talking about billing, there's also a more fun thing about billing. There's a construct called Azure Policies. But since billing was brought up, the better way or the more fun ways to do billing is to use tagging. That's what a lot of customers do. Now, it's really harder with our MCS, the way we delete and create VMs, to keep those tags, because we delete those VMs so that we save you money, and we even delete the VHDs underneath them. We create them in demand and so forth. A good way to do that is use what's referred to as Azure Policies. Think of it as group policies. It's not, but think of it that way. And there's tons of them. I delivered a lab on Saturday and Sunday. The first policy I put in there was do not allow any of my students to deploy a G4 VM or G5, which is like, I don't know, $10,000 a month. I don't want to take that bill. So that's one thing that I strongly advise customers to do. Set policies, at least for the VM sizes, because you don't want your customer just to randomly create a VM or your consumers. The second thing is tagging. That's one thing that ties to chargeback. If you have tags, those show in the Azure bill, and that helps you break down marketing versus sales versus X. The third thing is do some audits. Like example, Microsoft is trying to deprecate unmanaged disks. They still have them because a lot of people use them. So if one of your admins decide to do unmanaged disk, an alert, please use managed disk and so forth. Again, you can deny append audit. Those are usually the effects. You can even deny someone to use unmanaged disk.
And let me repeat that. Deny people the right to use. Friends don't let friends use unmanaged disks anymore.
Exactly. Sooner or later, that's going to be deprecated. I mean, let me put it that way. Microsoft is counting each unmanaged disk they have. They have like a counter up there that they see that number go down. OK, let's go to the deployment aspect of it. And I'm going to go to a quick demo here. So we talked about basic planning. Let's go to Citrix Cloud. First thing I want to do is I'm going to create what we refer to as a resource location. And I'm going to call this resource location SYN 105. And that's simply a placeholder. The second thing you do is you would go to Azure and create a VM we refer to as Cloud Connector. In any resource location, you need a component called Cloud Connector that is our liaison to that resource location. In this case, I created one in Azure. This is simply a VM over here that has just Windows OS. So the second step is you go to that Cloud Connector VM. You download this lovely component. Double-click on that. And all I want to highlight is the simplicity. And in a second, it should ask me to log on. I had that open a little while back. I'm signing in. All that is on the fly, as I mentioned. I have a lot of subscriptions. This is the one I'm going to be using. That's Citrix Cloud subscription. This is the one we just created here. That's the resource location. I'm going to install it. So now what we did is we did kind of the first marriage point between Citrix Cloud and Azure. This is going to be our liaison to Azure. So this should take like a couple of minutes there. Once this is done, we should go in here. And if I refresh, not as fast as I want it to be. OK, close. If I refresh, I expect that to be here. You see this yellow thing because what we're telling you is please at least do two. One is a single point of failure. So now we did the first part marriage, which is that's the VM that we did. The second thing I'm going to do is tie the other end to it, where I'm going to go here and say manage apps and desktops from Citrix Cloud. Again, the purpose is not to show you everything. It's more to show you the simplicity. I'm standing here quickly, tight schedule. I'm going to go to Manage. If you haven't seen it, it's the same tool that you know and you've been using for a long, long time. Second thing we do is we say create hosting connection. So I'm going to add a lovely hosting connection in here. Yeah. I should have copied one thing before.
I swear he does live demos just because he knows it makes me nervous.
I know. So we need to get the subscription ID. That's the first thing we need to get. And we're going to tell Citrix Cloud, please connect to this subscription. I am here. It's not too bad. And I'm going to go add a connection. That's what we refer to it.
And again, on the subscription side, don't accept subscription sprawl, so you don't want hundreds, but there's no reason to be afraid of more than one.
Okay.
There's absolutely no problems with it whatsoever, especially with the Citrix workloads, because it's pretty easy for us to collapse them later and consolidate if you want to, because as Loe said, you can use the same identity across all.
And the one thing you notice, we already have multiple connections, anyhow, to different subscriptions. So this is one. In this case, you can also pick which environment, Azure Global or US Gov and so forth, which zone. I'm going to use the one that was previously created in this case. Next. And you put a subscription ID. Oh. Give it a name, SYN 105, and create new. All it's going to ask me, give me your credentials. Tell me you own that subscription. That's pretty much what it's asking for. So what we're doing in this case is we're creating a new identity in Azure Active Directory. It's called Service Principal. Then we take that identity and we give it full access to the subscription. You might not like that. If you don't like that, you can manually create that service principal and you can pass it to us. But that's what we're doing in this case. Once that is done, this is the ongoing identity our application is going to use to authenticate to Azure. Okay? And this is done. We pick a region and so forth. So I don't want to, well, you know what? There's no loss. It's going to take 15 more seconds. I picked US, East US 2. I don't know if I have additional networks there. Here's my network. Next. And voila. So at this point of time, just to highlight one thing, I connected Azure and Citrix Cloud. From there on, it's everything you know. You go create a machine catalog. You go create a delivery group. All you do is point to that hosting connection and group. So in less than in about 5 minutes, I was able to connect those two clouds together. So let's talk about some considerations here that you would care about. I mean, it's simplistic to connect those two. But what about networks? How do you do it? The one thing I'd start by suggesting is you've got a VNet for your infrastructure. You might have a different VNet for your Citrix infrastructure. Similarly, make sure you've got a different VNet. VNet is the VPC term in AWS world, or GCP as well, which is virtual network. Make sure you have a separate VNet for your virtual apps and desktops. Very key. Make sure you have what's referred to as network security groups. That means like firewalling. Not everything goes from one VNet to another because you don't want the user logged on to that VM to be able to access other resources they shouldn't access. Okay.
And management of those resources. So anybody in the room still use ConfigMan? I love ConfigMan. And it's one of the most common instances of management tools for Citrix out there, both on the desktop space and in the server world. And so you can also just create, at that point, a network connection that allows your on-premise config man to manage your Azure infrastructure of those VMs. And so you can use exactly the same tools and processes you're already using, as long as you network it correctly and take your management tools with you. True with Splunk, true with whatever other management tools you want to bring.
This slide has one purpose. I can talk about MCS for an hour and the details of it, but the purpose is to tell you, for those who are always excited, today you cannot do PVS in Azure. As a matter of fact, you cannot do PVS in any public cloud today. So your image management solution in any public cloud and Citrix is going to be machine creation services. Under the hoods, what we do is you give us a golden image or the master image. We do some prep inside it, create a snapshot of it, and then on demand, we're going to replicate it 1,000 times or 100 times, depending on the number of users you ask. We do that to save money, to save you money in this specific case. Yes, some of you might tell me, well, I can shut down the VM, deallocate it, I'm not paying. But we do one step further. We also delete the disk. That way you're not even paying for the disk until you want to use it or when you turn it on. So you could turn it on about a couple hours earlier. We create the disks. We attach the VMs to the disk, and voila. So that's kind of the high-level thing in here. Azure Compute, that's another design decision. There's tons of Azure VMs today. By tons, probably I'm talking about 100 different VM types. Which one do you pick? That's always a question I get. I'll tell you one thing. Don't take your on-premises, oh, I have a server or a VM that's 4-core, 4 gig, and port it. I tell you, that is not going to work. What works is a tough answer. It's going to be a bit of magic. It's a bit of performance testing. It's a bit of profiling your application and understanding what works best for you. I would suggest starting with 3 types. If you're graphics intensive or you care about graphics, we're talking about the N series down below. NV2 are coming shortly. If you haven't ever done N series, wait for the NV2s.
And the N in N series is NVIDIA. So it's just it's an Azure box with an NVIDIA card in it that you then get to rent by the hour instead of having to pay for the $1,000 of NVIDIA cards sitting in your data center.
If your workload is compute intensive, I would say your starting point is an F or an F version 2. Okay? One of those. If your workload is more memory intensive, I would go to the DV2 series. Okay? Like D5 or something of the sort. So that's the decision point. What type of VM should I use? Second decision point. What type of disk should I use? In Azure, there's standard HDD, standard SSD, premium, and ultra SSD. Ultra SSD is in preview. We don't support it yet due to many reasons. One of them is it's in preview. We support the other 3 types today. If I'm telling you just pick one, you don't want to do homework, I'll tell you do the standard HDD for 2 reasons. Reason number 1, it always gives you 500 IOPS, regardless of the size of the disk, and it charges you by the amount of disk you use. Like even if you create a 128 gig disk and you're using 20 gig, it charges you 20 gig. It's cheaper. The only thing that's quote unquote worrisome about standard HDDs is that Microsoft doesn't guarantee the IOPS in it. They tell you we're doing best effort to be 500. Okay? If you want guaranteed IOPS, I would go to standard SSD. That gives you 500. That gives you IOPS depending on the size. That becomes the problem. So if you only need a 40 gig OS, you'll end up getting only 120 IOPS guaranteed. So you're forced to do at least 128 gig disk to get the 500 IOPS. Again, there is a chart on how that works. Bottom line, that's a key decision point. Premium SSD is yet another tier, higher, faster, lower latency. That's another key point. Bottom line, this costs money, and there's a huge difference between standard HDD and premium SSD. Randomly, use standard HDD and go from there.
And one of the biggest mistakes we consistently see people making is they model their user, and that's never do that. Model the app. Especially since Citrix, with our cloud and Azure and the rest, you can blend a Zen app deployment right with the Zen desktop. So if you want to give them a workspace environment, you can give them a really scaled down workspace environment, and then using Zen app stream in higher, the graphics-based stuff or higher end CPU if they need higher end processing. So you can not have to pay for the maximum a user might use during the month. They get to actually rent the Citrix or the Azure workloads for their higher end apps, but only when they use those higher end apps. So use the benefits of Citrix plus the benefits of cloud. Yeah. It's all about cost per user. It's not about number of users on a VM.
So last point here, again, if you're randomly or not sure of your application profile, I'd suggest start with standard HDD. And the other big reason about that, when you do premium SSDs or the SSD series, it's a different type of VM, slightly modified. They refer to it FS or DS. They add an S to it. The trick in there is that they change the temp drive on that disk. I know I'm geeking out, but important point. That temp drive holds the page file for the OS. So with standard HDD, you get a bigger page file. You can go up to 4 times the memory. If you pick the SFS series, DS series, the one that support SSD, you don't. They give you enough to match the memory, the RAM. So again, if you haven't profiled, pick standard HDD. If you have, pick the right one.
And if you don't remember any of that, just remember, just like every other Citrix deployment you've ever done, paging is not your friend. So don't let the Zen app or VDI, don't let it start paging, or you're paying for stuff you don't need to pay.
All right, so summing up of those, I said use the D family if you need memory, use the F family if you're high on CPU. The optimal, on the right-hand side, we did some analysis, and we found for a standard canned workload of Office that the F16 gave you the best bang for buck. It's about, I can't see that number, it's like 2 cents per user per hour. Again, I wouldn't take that as a real number, but that gives you that this is the better one. This is the better performing one. A few other things in here, probably I hit on most of those. The one thing, I'll go back here a little bit. You know what? The one thing I want to add, for you who are aware that we have a service called Smart Scale, and Smart Scale, in case of VDI or assigned desktops, what we do is we start and shut down VMs on a specific schedule. We're replacing that with a new service coming soon. Soon, it's like you see that lovely disclaimer down there. I'm going to say within about 2 months, it's going to be replaced by a component called Autoscale, and the Autoscale can do it on load-based or time-based. And you can even do tagging. So it can do that auto-scaling based on time or based on load. Let me see if there's any fun things we need to talk about before wrapping up in the last minute that you wanted. I have 30 seconds there.
The one thing I would add is when you're doing a VDI deployment on premises, you almost always have to overscale your hardware choices because you can't rebuy. So you bought the SAN, and it's really expensive to suddenly add another SAN controller or another whatever. So you kind of end up having to always build that fudge factor at the higher space. That's not how you do cloud. Fudge factor lower, because you can add resources to cloud anytime you want. That also means that we now need to look at scaling out. 30 VMs running 15 users each, or 1 user each, or whatever. Sometimes that's a cheaper alternative and easier alternative for you to manage than 1 VM running 150 users. And so understand the benefits of cloud, understand the costs of cloud, and because cloud allows us to do things differently, you get to scale, you get to start with the minimum and add to it if you're not happy with your results. You can't do that on premise because you can only buy hardware once.
Perfect. So maybe if I'm adding one thing to what Michael said, I did say the F16, which is a big instance, gives you the highest scalability. But that's the least one you can shut down and shut off, because if you put 100 users on it, the chances of you shutting it down is lower, as opposed to taking smaller instances with less users, and you can control that. I'm pointing you to, it's in the document, to this lovely scale paper. And the construct of it is not the number, it's more how we did the analysis. That way you can kind of learn how to do some profiling on your application. That's the key thing in this paper that I highlight in this deck, which is down there. We're getting a new one in the next 2 months that has refresh data for new VM types.
So that's it in terms of us for time. I do want to applaud Loe. That really is as close to 100 as I've ever seen him get. I'm pretty sure he was not doing 100 when he was a toddler. But we have every question you could imagine. We've probably got an answer for it. And more importantly, if you ever catch him at a bar, you want to talk net numbers and metrics, that's all he really wants to talk about. So thank you guys for your partnership. Thank you guys for being here. Enjoy the night, and see you tomorrow.
Thank you.